internal audits, management review, and all of that good stuff. And that's great. But the question we have to ask is the result of that, is the output of all of that, consistent, conforming product that is being developed and delivered to the customers? If it's not, then something within the various elements here of the cause and effect diagram, something is not working, and we need to address that. So a good quality management system is about more than just having the procedures in place and the manuals, the meeting the individual requirements of the standard. My understanding, and this is based on the 30-odd years that I've been involved in quality management, if we take it right down to the basics, 3 core concepts for any management system. First, we need to identify the processes that are needed to achieve the planned results. Now, those processes are part of the business of an organization, but the processes that we need to manage in order to be able to achieve consistent conforming product may be different from the processes, for example, that we need to manage to achieve optimal environmental performance or optimal health and safety management. And indeed, there may be conflicts between the optimization of everything that we want to achieve simultaneously. But within the scope, within the boundaries of the management system in particular that we're talking about, we need to be able to identify what is important. Obviously, some things are more important than others, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what is important in order for us to be able to achieve our objectives? Second, continually monitor the risks. Continually understand that cause and effect relationship that allows us to achieve the objectives that we want to achieve. And I would definitely like Dr. Deming in that respect, and Deming, as many of you know, said there is no substitute for profound knowledge. A profound knowledge of the business, understanding what is important, what is not important, what needs to be more closely controlled, maybe in the forms of greater documentation, checklists, competence requirements, and so on, and what is less risky, what is less important, what can be possibly dealt with on a verbal basis or on the basis of experience without the need for specific documented procedures. And then finally, manage the processes. And that word "manage" for me, I can't conceive of managing anything without inherently using the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So, Plan, Do, Check, Act in its simplest form, and people will always attack me here because people like to complicate things. I like to keep them simple. Plan, Do, Check, Act, right from the high-level strategic planning of an organisation. The strategic planning meetings, the formalities of a large corporation, for example, which are typically taking place around about this time of the year for the short-term planning for next year, but hopefully the planning is on a 5 or 10-year horizon. That Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle is rotating away in the background of everything that the organisation is doing. Equally, somebody on the production line or on the shop floor or in the sales force is spinning away their Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle on a minute-by-minute basis, doing what they do at the operational level. So this is superimposed in everything that the organisation does. What to do, how to do it, try to do things the way they were planned, check whether they went according to the plan, and then how to improve them next time. How to improve them next time, either by correcting what went wrong, identifying causes and taking corrective action, or looking at trends and taking action before there's a non-conformity, which of course we know as preventive action, or quite simply saying, is there a better way to do this, and incorporating innovation and incorporating improvements into the way that we do things. The generic process, inputs, set of interrelated activities, which is the process, producing desired outputs, which add value, which is the product that we want to deliver to the customer. We need to recognise there are other interested parties, and there may be undesired outputs in the form of waste or pollution. We need to think about how to carry out that process, and the extent of the planning depends on the risk. And we need to be aware that those processes can have an effect on various domains, business domains, which may be of interest. And we need to be conscious of how those different processes interact and the impact they have on product conformance, which obviously is the ISO 9001 dimension, and so on. And then we have the opportunity to monitor and measure before, during, and after the process. What's that? Well, that's really nothing more than the plan, do, check, act cycle at the level of an individual process. And then, of course, at the system level, we have to recognise that a system is interrelated to interacting processes, individual, some providing inputs into other processes, and they all have to be managed as a whole, using the plan, do, check, act cycle to optimise their performance in terms of the ability to provide products to the external customer. So that was a little bit of background. I hope there's nothing new there, but I hope it puts what I'm going to say next into context. I'm sure many of you have heard, and there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of comment about what we know as Annex SL. Annex SL to the ISO directives, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If we first, let me just talk as this slide comes up, just to give you an idea of the number of standards. Not all of them are management system standards, certainly not all of them are requirement standards, but just to give you an idea of the backdrop under which we are talking within that sustainable development triple bottom line concept. You know, we've got things like the traditional ISO 9001 up here. We've got the ISO 14001 over here. We've got various sector derivatives of ISO 9001. We've got new standards coming along, sustainable purchasing, energy management that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, asset management, sustainable event management, road traffic safety management, anti-bribery management, and so on. Well, ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, and probably about 5 years ago, somebody came to the conclusion there's something wrong here, guys, because we've got all these standards, and they're actually not standardized, they're not harmonized. Many of them are saying pretty much the same thing, but in different ways, using slightly different words. And so it was recognized that there was an urgent need to align the various management system standards within the ISO portfolio, but also extending beyond the ISO portfolio to some of the other standards, such as the OSHA's 18001 Health and Safety Management System standard. So ISO set up what's called a Joint Technical Coordination Group to come up with a joint vision for management system standards, high-level structure for all its standards, identical subclause titles under that high-level structure, and generic core vocabulary for the management system standards. The aim is to make life easier for those who wish to have what I would call a single management system. I don't like the word integrated management system because that implies that you are forcing things into an integration. Whereas most organizations, they have a management system, and that management system has to address the requirements of multiple standards, and we want to make that as easy as possible, but not require organizations. It's not a requirement to have all the requirements of the standard integrated into one simple system. Makes sense to do it, but it is not required. And so out of that work came the ISO directives Part 1 2012 revision, Annex SL, which incorporates those recommendations of the Joint Technical Coordination Group, defines common structure and format for all new ISO management system standards and for the revisions to existing standards. We are estimating around about 30% or more of each standard will be identical. So around about 30% of the next revision of ISO 9001 will be identical to around about 30% of the text of ISO 14001, and we believe that by doing that, it will make life a whole lot easier for those organisations who are implementing multiple standards at the same time. This is what the high-level structure looks like. The first three topics, pretty much the boilerplate stuff. We then talk about the context of the organisation. What are the internal and the external factors that are relevant to an organisation's quality management system? Is it working in a highly regulated environment? What's the, let's say, the level of literacy of the workforce? What about local rules and regulations, availability of raw materials, and so on, that allow an organisation to develop a management system that is appropriate to its specific circumstances. We then have a clause on leadership, not just top management, but leadership throughout all the various layers of management. Planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. So that's the core structure of all future ISO management system standards, and that's the core structure that we've adopted for the next revision of ISO 9001. So let me talk now a little bit about that revision. The ISO standards development process is an extremely robust and well-tested process. It takes time to achieve international consensus, as you can imagine, particularly when you're talking about over 100 countries, many different languages and many different interested parties. But we always start by understanding the needs and expectations of the users